I'm Lewis Knight, 43 years old, and for the past 15 years I've dedicated my career to being a senior systems architect at Tycoon Solutions. Over that time, I meticulously designed and maintained the critical IT infrastructure that supports our company's operations, contributing directly to an $8.5 million annual revenue stream. My work wasn't just about writing code or drawing diagrams. It was about building dependable, scalable systems that clients could trust implicitly. I developed extensive documentation, from detailed system blueprints to comprehensive access logs, ensuring that every change was tracked and every approval recorded. This methodical approach made me a reliable pillar within the company, trusted by both clients and colleagues. That morning at the Grand Marquis Hotel was supposed to be routine, just another client meeting with Tycoon's largest account to discuss ongoing projects and future needs. The conference room's glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Sitting beside me were members of the client's executive team, and just across from us was Mark Reynolds, our Vice President of Operations. I had worked with Mark before, but recent shifts in company policy had created some tension beneath our professional exterior. The meeting started smoothly, with me presenting the latest system update timelines and maintenance schedules. I had anticipated questions about the new integration modules and had prepared detailed responses. But then, abruptly, Mark cut in, his tone cold and dismissive. In front of the client delegation, he declared, "Lewis, you're dead weight." The words hit harder than any technical failure. Silence fell over the room. The client representatives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to react to this public rebuke. Mark made no effort to soften the blow or explain himself. Instead, he proceeded to terminate my employment on the spot, right there in front of everyone. My immediate reaction was one of composed professionalism. There was no room for emotional outburst or confrontation in that moment, only the necessity to safeguard my reputation and plans. I responded succinctly, "Understood." Behind that calm answer, however, my mind was already cataloging every detail: the timing, the witnesses, the exact wording of his dismissal, and the client's reactions. Every facet of that meeting was critical evidence for what I knew would become a strategic response. Public humiliation wasn't just an attack, it was a calculated move, and I needed to respond accordingly. I began to quietly document the incident as soon as I could, starting with notes on my phone and discreetly recording the sequence of events in my mind. I registered Mark's tone, the atmosphere in the room, and even the subtle shifts in body language from the client representatives who had just witnessed their trusted architect being discarded like an asset past its usefulness. I knew this moment would define the next phase of my career, and I was determined to approach it not with bitterness, but with clear, measured strategy. As I left the hotel lounge that day, the noise and energy of the bustling lobby contrasted sharply with the quiet resolve building within me. I wasn't just a disgraced employee, I was a professional whose skills, contracts, and documented contributions had value that I intended to protect and leverage. The public firing was not an end, but the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan to expose the truth behind the cost-cutting maneuvers, reclaim my rightful benefits, and rebuild my professional standing on a foundation stronger than before. Every detail mattered. The exact phrasing Mark used, the presence of the largest client as a witness, the abruptness of the termination, these were not accidents. They were part of an attempt to justify his decisions and suppress any counterclaims I might have. But I was already building my case in my mind, a case grounded in contractual obligations, documented performance, and system dependencies known only to me. This incident was the catalyst, but my response would be rooted in rationality, evidence, and strategic patience. I had spent 15 years refining my expertise, backing it with thorough records and professional integrity. Now those same foundations would serve as my shield and sword. The path forward was clear. Remain calm, document meticulously, and prepare to challenge the injustice not through confrontation, but through precision and professionalism. The first block of this journey had been harshly written by Mark's reckless arrogance, but the next chapters would be authored by my disciplined resolve. Over the course of 15 years at Tycoon Solutions, I steadily built and refined the backbone of the company's IT infrastructure, systems that weren't just functional, but instrumental in driving our business forward. My role as senior systems architect involved far more than technical design. It required anticipating future growth, safeguarding data integrity, and ensuring seamless scalability. I architected solutions that supported complex workflows across multiple departments, directly contributing to a streamlined operation that saved the company approximately $1.2 million annually. These savings stemmed from efficiency improvements I engineered, such as automating data synchronization processes and optimizing server loads to minimize downtime and maintenance costs. My tenure included securing and maintaining 5 key client contracts, collectively responsible for $8.5 million in annual revenue. These contracts were not accidental wins. They were achieved through close collaboration with both clients and internal teams, ensuring our systems met highly specific security standards and performance benchmarks that were often contractual requirements. Each client had unique operational demands, and I tailored our solutions accordingly, producing detailed system blueprints and integration plans that were subsequently approved and signed off by client representatives. These documents became part of the official contract appendices, serving as vital references for both ongoing maintenance and compliance audits. In 2015, my contributions were formally recognized with a promotion to senior architect, a role that expanded my responsibilities to managing a proprietary system unique to TechCore solutions. This system, critical to client operations, was complex enough to require exclusive knowledge and access privileges, knowledge that only I possessed. I had developed exhaustive documentation covering every component, architecture diagrams illustrating data flows, access logs tracking every authorized and unauthorized attempt to interact with the system, and meticulous change request approvals documented through email chains and internal ticketing systems. My process ensured full traceability, so any modification or update to the infrastructure could be audited down to the individual engineer and timestamp. My salary of $145,000 reflected the high value placed on my expertise, but equally important were my vested benefits, including a severance package totaling $118,000. These benefits were secured through carefully negotiated employment contracts, which included clauses addressing intellectual property rights, non-compete provisions, and severance conditions. I had always maintained a professional vigilance regarding these contracts, understanding their importance in protecting both my career and the proprietary technologies I developed. The combination of my salary and benefits made me a significant investment for the company, one that executives like Mark Reynolds saw as an opportunity for cost reduction rather than a resource to be nurtured. My work was not conducted in isolation. I cultivated strong trust-based relationships with both clients and fellow engineers. Clients frequently commended the reliability and foresight embedded in the systems I crafted, often requesting my direct involvement in strategic planning sessions. Internally, I functioned as a technical mentor, guiding junior staff and reviewing their work to maintain the high standards necessary for our system's integrity. This reputation for reliability and comprehensive knowledge created a professional brand that was difficult to replicate, which ironically positioned me as both invaluable and vulnerable when company leadership decided to prioritize short-term budget cuts over long-term stability. Throughout my career, I adhered to a principle of exhaustive documentation and transparent communication. Every project phase was accompanied by detailed reports, system change logs, and client approval records. These documents were stored securely, backed up across multiple platforms, and strictly controlled via access permissions. I recognize that in a field where knowledge is power, thorough record-keeping is not just good practice, it's strategic capital. This mindset was instrumental in how I approached my work and would later form the foundation of the evidence supporting my claims against wrongful termination and breach of contract. It was precisely this combination of specialized expertise, documented contributions, and contractual protections that made the abrupt termination in front of our largest client so jarring. The decision to publicly dismiss someone whose work underpinned significant company revenue and operational stability was reckless, disregarding the systemic risks involved. From a professional standpoint, I understood immediately that this act was less about performance and more about cost-cutting expediency, a move that ignored the technical realities of the systems I managed and the potential fallout. Looking back, I can see how the very attributes that made me an asset, my exclusive knowledge, my methodical documentation, and my clear value to client retention, paradoxically marked me as a target for executives like Mark Reynolds. His priority was ruthless expense reduction, and he underestimated the complexities embedded in the infrastructure I maintained. I had built more than just systems. I had constructed a professional fortress, one that could withstand impulsive corporate maneuvers if wielded skillfully. This background, the years of precise system architecture, client trust, and contractual safeguards, was the foundation of my strategy going forward. I knew that my documentation and the proprietary nature of my work would serve as powerful leverage. The system blueprints alone demonstrated that without my expertise, the company faced significant technical risk. The access logs and email approvals formed an irrefutable trail of my involvement and authority over critical modules, and the severance and non-compete clauses embedded in my contracts gave me legal footing to challenge the termination and withheld benefits. In sum, my professional history at TechCore was not merely a resume listing accomplishments. It was a tightly woven web of technical mastery, contractual precision, and client relationships. These elements collectively formed a platform from which I could mount a systematic response to the betrayal I endured. This was not a matter of personal grievance. It was a calculated defense of professional integrity, backed by years of verifiable contributions and documented proof. I was preparing to transform the very foundations I had built into instruments of strategic justice. Mark Reynolds was under intense pressure. The company's board had mandated a 20% reduction in operating expenses for the fiscal year, a target that seemed increasingly unreachable without drastic measures. As Vice President of Operations, Mark's role was to deliver results, and he saw the senior technical staff, especially those with high salaries and specialized knowledge, as prime cost centers ripe for trimming. I wasn't just on his list. I was, in his eyes, the biggest liability. That day at the Grand Marquis Hotel was the execution of a plan he had refined behind closed doors. His strategy was straightforward but reckless. Replace an experienced senior systems architect, earning $145,000 annually, with a junior architect at roughly half that salary. Mark's justification hinged on immediate cost savings, without regard for the systemic risks or the nuanced expertise embedded in my role. He believed the proprietary system I managed could be transferred with minimal disruption, ignoring the years of accumulated knowledge and the documentation I alone maintained. The proprietary nature of the system wasn't just a technical detail. It was the linchpin of my leverage, and, unbeknownst to him, the core vulnerability in his plan. Mark's decision was further driven by an intent to deny me the severance package and intellectual property rights explicitly outlined in my employment contract. He knew that withholding severance could save the company $118,000 up front, a tempting figure when margins were tight. The non-compete clause tied to that severance was his silent obstacle. If enforced, it would restrict my ability to work with competitors, effectively limiting my career options. His plan was to cut me loose abruptly, circumvent the contractual obligations, and hope I lacked the resources or knowledge to challenge the move. What Mark failed to appreciate was the depth of my documentation and contractual vigilance. Over the years, I had kept exhaustive records of every system change, email approval, and access log, and I had rigorously reviewed my employment contract to understand precisely what protections it afforded. The severance terms were clear, and the clauses regarding intellectual property rights and non-competition were unambiguous. His attempt to sidestep these wasn't just unethical, it was legally precarious. Furthermore, Mark did not secure the system access credentials or transition plans necessary to maintain operational continuity. I was the sole custodian of critical authentication keys and system architecture diagrams essential for troubleshooting and development. Without my cooperation, the company was vulnerable to technical failures and client dissatisfaction. This oversight exposed a fatal flaw in Mark's cost-cutting gambit, one that would soon become evident to everyone involved. Adding a new layer of complexity, Derek Collins, a tech billionaire and visionary CEO who had previously been a client of TechCore Solutions, was present during the public firing incident. Derek had a reputation for spotting undervalued talent and disruptive ideas, and his keen eye caught the injustice unfolding before him. His subtle smile upon hearing my name was not mere courtesy. It was an unspoken offer of alliance. Derek understood the value of expertise and the peril of corporate short-sightedness, making him a potential strategic partner in the professional path I was about to embark upon. Recognizing the legal intricacies and the need for precise action, I engaged James Porter, an employment lawyer with a reputation for navigating complex corporate disputes. James was methodical, pragmatic, and deeply knowledgeable about employment law, severance negotiations, and intellectual property claims. Together, we began dissecting the corporate strategy behind my firing, identifying the contractual breaches, and assessing the regulatory implications of Mark's maneuvers. This triad of perspectives, the operational ruthlessness of Mark Reynolds, the strategic investment potential of Derek Collins, and the legal acumen of James Porter, framed the professional battlefield on which I was about to operate. Mark's underestimation of my documentation and contractual rights, coupled with his failure to secure system continuity, laid the groundwork for a systematic challenge. My role had been deliberately minimized and misrepresented, but the reality was that the company's most critical systems depended on knowledge that resided exclusively with me. This exclusivity translated into leverage, especially when paired with documented violations of contractual and labor laws. The plan that Mark and the company's leadership had set in motion was not only flawed but also legally vulnerable. The moment was ripe for a professional counterstrike grounded in evidence, legal precision, and strategic partnership. From my vantage point, this was no longer a simple employment dispute. It was a calculated attempt to erase my contributions and sidestep financial obligations. The public humiliation was a tactic to undermine my professional credibility, but I saw it as an opportunity to expose systemic failures and corporate malfeasance. I was not reacting emotionally, but calculating my next moves with an acute awareness of every contractual term, every system dependency, and every witness to the unfolding drama. In summary, Mark Reynolds' motivation was clear: slash costs by eliminating high salary positions and absorbing their functions cheaply. His critical oversight was twofold: ignoring the technical risks embedded in the system architecture I controlled, and underestimating the legal and strategic consequences of breaching contractual obligations. Meanwhile, the presence of Derek Collins and the involvement of James Porter transformed this firing from a unilateral corporate decision into a multi-front professional and legal challenge. The stakes had escalated, and so had my resolve to leverage every documented advantage in pursuit of justice and professional vindication. After the initial shock of being fired in front of our largest client, I immediately shifted focus to the details that would shape my response. Back at my apartment that evening, I spread out all the termination-related paperwork that had been handed to me, or, more accurately, half-handed and obfuscated. The official termination notice was curt and legally thin, but that was expected from a company trying to minimize exposure. What stood out immediately was the conspicuous absence of any mention of my severance package or the vested benefits promised in my contract, a glaring omission that struck me as not just negligent, but deliberately illegal. I methodically compared the termination letter against my signed employment contract. The contract clearly stipulated a severance sum of $118,000, payable immediately upon termination without cause. Additionally, it outlined specific clauses protecting my intellectual property rights and non-competition terms that, crucially, were contingent upon receipt of the severance. If these payments were withheld, the company forfeited those protections and exposed itself to significant liability. Next, I turned to internal company communications to confirm suspicions that this termination was premeditated and part of a broader cost-cutting scheme. I accessed my corporate email archive, which I had routinely backed up. Through the thread of messages exchanged in the weeks prior to my firing, I uncovered several emails from Mark Reynolds to HR and other executives. One email, dated 2 weeks before my termination, explicitly discussed replacing my position with a less experienced junior architect at roughly half my current salary. Mark referred to this as an immediate cost-saving imperative and urged haste in executing the transition smoothly and quietly. More alarmingly, internal hiring records revealed that the junior architect had already been brought on board and was undergoing training, well before I was officially notified of my termination. This timeline suggested a deliberate attempt to circumvent contractual obligations and severance negotiations. The company effectively preempted my departure, ensuring that the replacement was operational ahead of schedule, thus undermining the legitimacy of my role and my right to severance. Further digging into the email chains uncovered another critical thread: Mark's efforts to conceal the financial implications of this maneuver from the board and auditors. He explicitly instructed HR to reclassify severance liabilities and to delay or deny any payments that might trigger compliance audits. These communications revealed an intent not only to cut costs, but to hide those cuts from regulatory oversight and internal governance, a breach of fiduciary duty. On the technical side, I reviewed access logs and system modification records for the proprietary system I had administered. These logs showed multiple unauthorized attempts to access secured modules following my termination, executed by the junior replacement and supported by IT staff, acting without my knowledge or approval. Given that I was the sole holder of the requisite authentication keys and procedural know-how, these attempts represented a breach of system security protocols and an exposure to operational risk. To fully understand the scope of these violations, I cross-referenced the company's actions with state employment laws and my contractual clauses. State labor statutes were explicit about severance pay requirements and wrongful termination protections. The unilateral withholding of severance and preemptive hiring before official notice violated both statutory mandates and the terms outlined in my contract. There was also a clear violation of intellectual property protections, as the company attempted to repurpose proprietary systems without my consent or proper knowledge transfer documentation. Throughout this process, I maintained a detached, analytical mindset. There was no room for emotional reaction. My role demanded precision and clarity. I created a comprehensive matrix listing each violation, categorizing them by legal significance and evidentiary strength. Severance withholding topped the list as the most straightforward leverage point, supported by contractual language and payment history. System security breaches and unauthorized access attempts followed, underscored by access logs and authentication records. Finally, client contract entanglements due to system instability presented a critical business risk that the company was ignoring, which could be leveraged to gain client cooperation. I also began drafting an initial timeline of events, documenting every detail from the client meeting at the Grand Marquis Hotel to the subsequent internal communications and system access attempts. This timeline would become a backbone for any legal or regulatory complaints. Each entry was carefully time-stamped, cross-referenced with email headers, and supplemented by witness notes I had taken in real time. This phase of discovery was critical. It revealed not only the surface-level injustice of my firing, but exposed a calculated plan to deprive me of contractual rights and undermine system integrity. The evidence painted a clear picture. Mark Reynolds had orchestrated a covert operational shift without regard for legal or ethical boundaries. More importantly, the company was vulnerable to claims of wrongful termination, breach of contract, and potential regulatory violations. With this solid foundation of facts and documentation, I was positioning myself not as a disgraced employee, but as a professional armed with irrefutable proof of corporate misconduct. Each piece of evidence was a tool to be wielded strategically. The next step would be to engage legal expertise to translate these discoveries into formal actions, a process that required discipline, patience, and unwavering focus on the professional battlefield ahead. After completing my initial audit of the termination documents and internal communications, I knew the next phase demanded specialized legal guidance to transform this evidence into actionable leverage. I scheduled a consultation with James Porter, an employment lawyer I had vetted previously, for his expertise in corporate contractual disputes and intellectual property matters. James was known for his meticulous approach and pragmatic strategies, qualities I valued highly, given the complexity and sensitivity of my situation. In preparation for our meeting, I compiled a comprehensive inventory of all relevant evidence. This was not just a sporadic collection of files, but a meticulously organized dossier segmented into distinct categories to underscore the systemic nature of the company's transgressions. First, I gathered the detailed system architecture diagrams I had developed over the years, blueprints that illustrated the proprietary infrastructure, data flows, and interdependencies within TechCore's critical modules. These documents weren't just technical schematics. They were visual representations of my unique knowledge and the operational risks the company incurred by severing my role abruptly. Next, I curated extensive email trails that documented a consistent chain of communication involving Mark Reynolds, HR, and other executives. These emails explicitly revealed cost-cutting directives, premeditated plans for my replacement, and attempts to circumvent contractual severance obligations. Each message was saved with headers intact and timestamps verified to ensure admissibility and credibility. I flagged key passages within these emails that explicitly discussed reclassifying severance liabilities and urged expedited covert execution of the termination plan. Additionally, I assembled all contractual documents related to my employment, my original contract, amendments, signed severance agreements, and the non-compete clauses. Each page was cross-referenced with relevant sections of state employment law to highlight areas where TechCore's actions clearly violated statutory protections. I took special care to annotate these contracts with notes on clauses that would become focal points in potential legal challenges, such as the severance payout terms and intellectual property rights retention contingent on those payments. Witness statements were another critical component of my evidence portfolio. I discreetly reached out to 3 trusted colleagues who had directly observed the client meeting at the Grand Marquis Hotel and were aware of Mark's behavior and the company's internal maneuvers. I carefully documented their accounts, capturing precise details about the atmosphere during the firing, Mark's demeanor, and the client representative's reactions. These testimonies provided corroborative support to my narrative and helped establish the public and professional context of the dismissal. To safeguard this evidence, I encrypted and backed up all files onto multiple secured drives, ensuring redundancy and preventing any risk of data tampering or loss. I established strict access protocols, limiting file availability to only myself and James. From a professional standpoint, this was essential. Not only did it protect the integrity of the information, but it also signaled a disciplined approach to handling sensitive material, which would be critical in negotiations or courtroom proceedings. During my consultation with James, we methodically reviewed each segment of the evidence inventory. James's legal perspective illuminated how these documents interlinked to support claims of wrongful termination, breach of fiduciary duty, and intellectual property violations. We discussed exploiting the non-compete clause strategically. Its enforcement depended on severance disbursement, which TechCore was withholding illegally. This gave us leverage not only to demand payment, but to challenge any attempts to restrict my future employment unfairly. Our discussions also identified regulatory compliance failures by the company, particularly in how they concealed severance liabilities from auditors and misrepresented staffing changes to the board. James emphasized the importance of filing formal complaints with state labor agencies, alongside potential litigation, to increase pressure on TechCore and protect my rights. We planned a multi-pronged approach combining legal action with regulatory scrutiny to maximize impact. Parallel to these legal preparations, I maintained communication with Derek Collins. His interest in my situation was not merely sympathetic. He was evaluating how my expertise could integrate into his operations. Our dialogue focused on aligning my technical competencies with his startup's strategic goals, while he assured me of his support throughout the legal process. This alliance was critical. It provided not only a professional lifeline, but also strengthened our position by demonstrating market recognition of my value outside TechCore. Throughout the initial planning phase, I remained disciplined in documenting every interaction. Emails with James, notes from our meetings, summaries of calls with Derek. This meta-documentation created a transparent audit trail of my strategic response, reinforcing the professionalism underpinning my actions. It was important that every step be defensible and verifiable, reflecting the same rigor I applied in my architectural work. As the strategic planning phase unfolded, my internal monologue was focused on structured patience and tactical deployment. Success depended on timing, when to escalate legal action, when to engage clients directly, and how to leverage public perceptions without compromising confidentiality or professionalism. I was building not just a case, but a framework to systematically dismantle the unjust position TechCore had forced upon me. This phase was about preparation, fortification, and alignment of legal, technical, and strategic assets. The evidence inventory was the cornerstone, a comprehensive, irrefutable compilation that transformed scattered facts into a coherent narrative of corporate malfeasance. Supported by James's legal expertise and Derek's strategic partnership, I was positioning myself for the complex negotiations and professional challenges ahead. The process demanded unwavering discipline, a clear head, and a commitment to leveraging documented truth over reaction. Every document, note, and email in my inventory was a piece of the puzzle, each critical to advancing my rightful claims. The groundwork laid during this phase would dictate the course of subsequent legal actions and professional maneuvers, turning a moment of public disgrace into a calculated professional resurgence. When I met with James Porter, the employment lawyer I had carefully selected, our first task was to align the extensive evidence I had gathered into a cohesive legal framework. James brought a methodical, no-nonsense approach that matched my own professional rigor. We began by categorizing the breaches and analyzing their legal implications one by one. The depth of my documentation gave us a tremendous advantage. Every claim was traceable to specific, verifiable records. James immediately identified 3 primary violations that we could pursue: wrongful termination without severance, breach of fiduciary duty by Mark Reynolds and the company's leadership, and intellectual property theft. Each of these claims rested on solid evidence that I had painstakingly compiled and preserved. First, wrongful termination without severance was the clearest violation. My employment contract explicitly guaranteed a severance payment of $118,000 if terminated without cause. Yet the termination documents were silent on this, and the company had failed to disburse any severance funds. James pointed out that under state labor law, this was not only a contractual breach, but a statutory violation that exposed TechCore to potential penalties. The email threads from Mark directing HR to conceal severance liabilities further demonstrated intent to circumvent legal obligations, a critical detail that strengthened our position. Next, we turned to breach of fiduciary duty. Mark Reynolds, as VP of Operations, had a legal and ethical obligation to act in the company's best interest, which included safeguarding operational stability and maintaining compliance with contractual obligations. His deliberate concealment of severance liabilities from the board and auditors, along with preemptively hiring my replacement before notifying me, constituted a clear dereliction of duty. The internal email exchanges James reviewed showed Mark's focus on short-term cost-cutting at the expense of system integrity and legal compliance. This reckless behavior jeopardized both TechCore's business continuity and its regulatory standing. The third and perhaps most complex violation was intellectual property, IP theft. I had exclusive control over the proprietary system's architecture, including critical modules that no one else fully understood. My documentation, blueprints, access logs, change approval emails, proved this exclusivity. After my termination, the logs revealed unauthorized attempts by the junior replacement and IT staff to access and modify these protected system components without my knowledge or formal handover. This unauthorized access not only breached security protocols, but also violated clauses in my contract protecting my IP rights. James emphasized that this constituted a misappropriation of proprietary technology and knowledge, grounds for both civil damages and potential injunctive relief. To further buttress our case, we prepared regulatory complaints highlighting TechCore's failure to comply with labor laws and internal governance standards. James advised that filing complaints with the State Labor Board would not only increase pressure on TechCore to negotiate, but also place the company under formal scrutiny, potentially uncovering additional compliance gaps. This dual legal and regulatory approach was essential to maximizing leverage. James also helped me understand the strategic value of the non-compete clause embedded in my severance agreement. Since TechCore had withheld severance, they forfeited the right to enforce the non-compete, which meant I could pursue new employment opportunities freely, a critical point with my ongoing discussions with Derek Collins. This detail was a powerful bargaining chip, allowing me to reject restrictive offers and maintain control over my career trajectory. To ensure our claims were technically airtight, Derek Collins assembled a team of tech experts to validate the system dependency assertions. Their independent review corroborated that the proprietary modules I managed were integral to the company's operations and that the unauthorized access attempts posed substantial risk. This expert testimony would be pivotal in any litigation, underscoring the professional and operational gravity of TechCore's breaches. Throughout this phase, I maintained meticulous records of every meeting, every piece of evidence, and every strategic decision. This meta-documentation mirrored the transparency and precision I applied in my architectural work, reinforcing the integrity of our case. I viewed the legal process as an extension of my professional discipline, emphasizing fact over emotion, evidence over conjecture. Together, James and I crafted a legal complaint demanding $350,000 in damages, an amount reflecting severance owed, compensatory costs for breach of contract and fiduciary duty, and damages for intellectual property theft. The claim was carefully worded to withstand scrutiny, citing specific contractual clauses and statutory provisions, supported by the robust documentary trail. This legal scaffolding was more than just a formal complaint. It was a strategic instrument designed to compel TechCore to confront the consequences of its reckless leadership. The combination of contractual violations, fiduciary breaches, and IP misappropriation presented a comprehensive indictment of their conduct, one that would resonate not only in court, but across the industry and client base. Our preparation also included contingency plans for negotiations and potential settlements, with clear thresholds for acceptable outcomes and conditions tied to the restoration of professional reputation and financial restitution. At every step, I remained focused on the professional implications, ensuring that any resolution would protect my technical legacy and future prospects. This phase of building the legal and professional case was intense but necessary. It transformed raw evidence into actionable claims and positioned me as a formidable adversary with irrefutable documentation and expert support. The groundwork laid during these sessions with James established a foundation for all subsequent actions, setting the stage for an eventual reckoning that TechCore would find difficult to evade. After finalizing our legal preparations, the next phase was executing coordinated actions to apply pressure on TechCore solutions while protecting my professional reputation and opening new avenues for my career. The first step was to serve formal legal notices directly to TechCore's corporate headquarters. I entrusted James Porter to draft and deliver the notices, which clearly outlined the company's breaches of contract, wrongful termination claims, and intellectual property violations. These documents demanded immediate payment of the withheld severance and cessation of unauthorized access to proprietary systems. The goal here was twofold: to establish an official record of my claims and to signal that I was prepared to escalate if they failed to comply. Simultaneously, James and I filed a detailed complaint with the State Labor Board. This complaint enumerated each violation of labor statutes, including the unlawful withholding of severance pay and the preemptive hiring of my replacement before my termination notice. The complaint cited specific sections of state employment law and incorporated evidence from internal emails and contractual clauses. Recognizing that labor boards often act slowly but with regulatory authority, we viewed this complaint as a strategic lever to keep TechCore under scrutiny and to compel internal accountability beyond mere civil litigation. Aware that client trust was paramount to TechCore's survival, I took the deliberate and cautious step of alerting several key clients to potential risks stemming from the unauthorized replacement of my role. I composed professional, measured communications emphasizing that recent system changes might not have been overseen by personnel with the requisite expertise, and that I remained available to address any technical concerns. The message was carefully worded to avoid disparagement, while underscoring the risk of operational instability, a risk that could impact service delivery and contractual obligations. This was a calculated move. If clients felt their operations were endangered, it would amplify pressure on TechCore to resolve the matter expediently. Meanwhile, Derek Collins formalized his offer. He extended a lead architect position at his startup, Collins Innovations, with a $180,000 annual salary, significantly higher than my previous compensation, and an equity stake, reflecting his confidence in my capabilities. Derek recognized not only my technical expertise, but also the strategic value I brought in navigating complex challenges. Our discussions centered on aligning my skills with his company's vision and preparing me to transition smoothly once the legal and professional situation at TechCore reached a critical point. This offer provided both a safety net and a platform for professional resurgence. Throughout this period, Mark Reynolds remained oblivious to the full extent of the consequences his decisions were triggering. He continued to boast internally about the cost savings achieved by replacing me and the onboarding of the junior architect. In meetings I learned of through confidential sources, Mark claimed leadership credit for streamlining operations and cutting expenses, unaware that his gamble was unraveling behind the scenes. His failure to anticipate the technical risks and legal liabilities was a critical blind spot. I maintained strict professional decorum during this precarious phase. TechCore's HR and management reached out for routine exit formalities, references, and to clarify transition details. I responded with precise, measured communications, confirming receipt of documents and referring any potential technical inquiries to my legal counsel. I declined all informal requests for consulting or technical support, understanding that any engagement without firm legal parameters could jeopardize my position. Each interaction was logged, time-stamped, and added to the evidence inventory to ensure full transparency. In parallel, I monitored system activity remotely where possible, noting ongoing unauthorized access attempts and configuration changes made by the replacement architect and IT staff. These observations reinforced our claims of intellectual property violations and operational risks. I forwarded summaries of these incidents to James and Derek's technical team, who evaluated them as further validation of the company's precarious position. The combination of legal notices, regulatory complaints, client alerts, and Derek's recruitment offer established a multi-front professional offensive. TechCore was now facing pressure from regulatory authorities, potential client attrition, and the threat of a well-documented lawsuit. Meanwhile, I was secured in a superior professional role, strengthening my negotiating position. As the legal and strategic pressure mounted, my internal focus remained on maintaining professionalism and controlled communication. This period was not about confrontation, but about systematically activating consequences through documented channels and strategic alliances. The groundwork was laid, and the professional reckoning I had anticipated was quietly unfolding. The next moves would require patience and precision, but the trajectory toward accountability was unmistakable. Within weeks of my departure, the consequences of TechCore's ill-conceived cost-cutting plan became unmistakably clear. The junior architect Mark Reynolds had hastily installed as my replacement simply lacked the comprehensive understanding required to maintain the proprietary system I had developed and exclusively managed. Despite training sessions and cursory documentation handed over under duress, critical configuration errors began surfacing rapidly, errors that only someone with deep architectural insight could have anticipated or prevented. I monitored system status reports and client feedback channels closely, keeping detailed logs of the emerging issues. The errors manifested as unexpected downtime, data synchronization failures, and security protocol breaches within the modules I had meticulously safeguarded. For example, one key client experienced repeated service interruptions during peak hours, an incident directly traceable to misconfigured load balancing rules that I alone had previously tuned. The junior architect's insufficient grasp of the system's intricate interdependencies resulted in patchwork fixes that only compounded instability. The repercussions rippled swiftly through TechCore's client base. Several major clients, including the very delegation present during my firing, began expressing formal concerns about system reliability. I reviewed copies of client communications and recorded conference call summaries, where their IT directors requested urgent technical clarifications. Payments were delayed, with some clients invoking contractual clauses for withholding fees pending satisfactory remediation. These financial impacts threatened to erode the revenue streams my systems had protected for years. Simultaneously, the State Labor Board responded to the complaint James Porter and I had filed regarding the company's wrongful termination and severance violations. I received official confirmation that an inquiry had been opened, with a designated case number assigned and a timeline set for initial hearings. This development underscored that the company's legal exposure was growing beyond the civil dispute into regulatory enforcement territory, increasing the stakes considerably. Mark Reynolds's behavior shifted noticeably in response to these pressures, and I tracked his escalating attempts to manage the unfolding crisis. He initiated multiple calls and emails directed at me, ostensibly seeking technical assistance to mitigate the system failures. Each outreach was carefully documented. Time-stamped emails, transcribed voicemail messages, and call logs to maintain a comprehensive record. I declined all offers to consult or provide informal support, redirecting Mark to my legal counsel and reiterating that any engagement required formal agreements. His tone in these communications grew increasingly desperate, with veiled threats about potential legal consequences for me if I failed to cooperate, balanced by overt attempts to negotiate consulting fees for temporary assistance. I maintained a professional and measured stance throughout, recognizing that any informal involvement could undermine my legal position or signal weakness. Instead, I consistently referred all technical inquiries to James and reminded Mark of the ongoing litigation and regulatory reviews. Behind the scenes, client trust in TechCore's ability to manage the proprietary systems deteriorated rapidly. I received reports from Derek Collins's technical team confirming that several clients were actively considering terminating contracts due to the instability and risk introduced by the unauthorized system changes. Derek and I strategized on leveraging these client departures to highlight TechCore's managerial failures, thereby increasing both reputational and financial pressure on the company. The combination of operational failures, client dissatisfaction, legal inquiries, and my refusal to enable the company's recovery efforts created a compounding effect. Mark's gamble on replacing a seasoned architect with an underqualified junior staffer was unraveling in real time, exposing the recklessness of his cost-cutting approach. Yet on the surface, TechCore struggled to acknowledge the full scope of the problem, attempting instead to project an image of control and stability to stakeholders. Throughout this volatile period, I maintained my disciplined focus on documentation and professional communication. Every incident report, client complaint, and internal email exchange was catalogued in secure, indexed databases. I continued backing up all relevant data, ensuring the integrity and availability of evidence that demonstrated the direct causal link between the company's premature replacement and the operational failures. This period marked an inflection point, not simply a technical crisis, but a broader professional reckoning. The pressures mounting externally through clients and regulators, combined with internal disarray, signaled that TechCore's leadership faced significant consequences for their misjudgments. My strategic restraint and thorough documentation ensured that I remained a credible authority throughout, poised to amplify the repercussions in subsequent phases. As Mark spiraled between denial and frantic damage control, my alliance with Derek strengthened. Derek's team prepared to onboard clients exiting TechCore, further undermining the company's market position. Meanwhile, I continued consulting with James Porter, reviewing incoming regulatory correspondence and refining our legal strategy. The situation was deteriorating for TechCore, but my role was clear: maintain professional composure, leverage every documented failure, and apply calibrated pressure towards a systematic resolution. In sum, those first few weeks after my firing saw the rapid emergence of critical system failures caused by an inexperienced replacement mishandling configurations that only I fully comprehended. Major clients' confidence faltered, pushing payment delays and contract reviews. The State Labor Board's inquiry introduced formal oversight of TechCore's labor practices. Mark Reynolds's increasingly desperate attempts to engage me were professionally deflected, preserving my legal position. The cumulative effect was a cascading professional and operational crisis for TechCore, laying the groundwork for the next stages of strategic accountability. The day we officially filed the lawsuit against TechCore Solutions marked a pivotal escalation in this ongoing professional battle. Armed with irrefutable documentation and expert testimonies, our legal complaint meticulously outlined every breach, leaving no room for denial or obfuscation. James Porter and I had spent weeks ensuring the complaint was airtight, each claim directly traceable to specific evidence. Detailed system architecture diagrams proving my exclusive control over critical infrastructure, email threads exposing Mark Reynolds' deliberate cost-cutting schemes and attempts to conceal severance liabilities, and logs documenting unauthorized access attempts that violated intellectual property rights. Filing the lawsuit wasn't just a legal formality. It was a strategic maneuver designed to force TechCore's leadership to confront the severe repercussions of their mismanagement and contractual violations. The complaint demanded $350,000 in damages, encompassing withheld severance, compensatory costs for breach of fiduciary duty, and reparation for intellectual property theft. Every dollar requested reflected concrete losses, substantiated by documented facts, from the unpaid $118,000 severance to projected revenue impact due to system instability. This financial figure was carefully calibrated with James to balance assertiveness with credibility, aiming to pressure without alienating potential settlement discussions. Simultaneously, regulatory agencies intensified their investigations into TechCore's labor and compliance practices. The State Labor Board, prompted by our earlier complaint, expanded their inquiry to scrutinize the company's severance withholding, preemptive hiring practices, and internal governance lapses. This added governmental oversight created a dual front of legal and regulatory challenges for TechCore, increasing the pressure beyond civil litigation and magnifying potential penalties. The regulatory investigators requested detailed records from TechCore, including payroll documents, internal emails, and board meeting minutes, all of which were vulnerable due to the transparency we had already established through our evidence. Moreover, Derek Collins' endorsement added significant weight to our cause. His team of technical experts conducted an independent validation of the proprietary systems I had architected, corroborating our claims regarding the critical operational dependencies and the risks introduced by unauthorized system modifications. Their expert testimony was incorporated into the complaint as an annex, providing an authoritative, impartial assessment that bolstered the technical credibility of our case. Derek's active engagement also signaled to the industry and potential clients that my expertise was recognized and valued outside TechCore's confines. As the legal and regulatory processes deepened, several key clients began reacting to the emerging instability and governance concerns at TechCore. Through discreet communications I facilitated, always maintaining professional neutrality and avoiding disparagement, some clients initiated contract reviews, citing system reliability and vendor stability as key considerations. A few formally notified TechCore of their intent to terminate or renegotiate agreements, triggering financial repercussions that compounded the company's difficulties. These client actions were not orchestrated to sabotage but stemmed logically from documented service disruptions and governance lapses, reinforcing our position that TechCore's management failures had tangible commercial consequences. In parallel, Mark Reynolds' conduct became increasingly erratic. Internal sources conveyed that he was scrambling to contain the fallout, reaching out with settlement offers and veiled threats. His overtures included proposals for confidential agreements to limit publicity and mitigate damages, alongside warnings about potential counter-litigation if I pursued aggressive tactics. I responded consistently through James Porter, maintaining a professional stance. All communications will be handled through my legal counsel. This measured approach avoided personal entanglement, preserved my credibility, and ensured that discussions remained on a strictly legal and professional level. Derek Collins' team capitalized on the turmoil by initiating onboarding processes for clients disengaging from TechCore. This not only demonstrated confidence in my capabilities, but strategically amplified pressure on TechCore by threatening their market share and revenue streams. This professional realignment underscored the tangible business impact of the legal actions, not just punitive consequences, but a shift in industry alliances and client stewardship. The combined effect was a multifaceted professional and financial squeeze on TechCore that extended beyond courtroom filings into real-time market dynamics. Throughout this period, I maintained rigorous documentation of all developments: legal filings, regulatory communications, client correspondence, and Mark's outreach attempts were logged meticulously. This continuous record-keeping ensured every interaction could be referenced accurately, strengthening our case as it progressed. It also helped me remain focused on strategic objectives rather than reactive impulses, reinforcing a narrative grounded in professionalism and measured resolve. The professional environment around me was charged, yet controlled. While TechCore's internal stability deteriorated rapidly, my own position was bolstered by clear legal rights, industry support, and a superior employment offer from Derek Collins. This contrast highlighted the consequences of corporate mismanagement and the power of documented expertise, combined with legal precision. As the lawsuit proceeded and investigations unfolded, the professional reckoning I anticipated was no longer hypothetical. It was actively taking shape. TechCore was facing mounting challenges, legal, regulatory, and commercial, that they could neither ignore nor easily escape. My role was to sustain this momentum, ensuring that every step adhered to the highest standards of professionalism and strategic foresight, setting the stage for the subsequent unfolding of consequences that would redefine my career and TechCore's trajectory. In the weeks following the lawsuit filing and regulatory complaints, the consequences for TechCore Solutions intensified rapidly. The company, already strained by operational failures and client dissatisfaction, now found itself facing significant professional and legal fallout. The mounting pressure culminated with the termination of Mark Reynolds for gross misconduct. This action, while ostensibly a disciplinary measure, was the inevitable response to his reckless mismanagement, disregard for contractual obligations, and attempts to conceal critical financial liabilities from both the board and regulators. The termination sent a clear message internally that the leadership's cost-cutting gambit had crossed ethical and legal boundaries. TechCore's troubles did not end there. The State Labor Board's ongoing inquiry uncovered extensive violations, including illegal withholding of severance pay and unauthorized preemptive hiring before formal termination had been communicated. The resulting penalties imposed on the company exceeded $250,000, combining fines for labor violations with assessments for breaches of fiduciary duty. These fines were levied not only because of procedural failures, but also as a deterrent for corporate malfeasance. Regulatory scrutiny extended beyond financial penalties. TechCore faced potential bankruptcy risks as investor confidence waned and client contracts were jeopardized. As the legal spotlight intensified, a number of current and former employees came forward, emboldened by my case and the growing awareness of TechCore's disregard for contractual and labor protections. These individuals submitted detailed accounts of wrongful termination, severance withholding, and unsafe working conditions. Their testimonies portrayed a pattern of systemic malfeasance rather than isolated incidents, revealing a culture of expedient cost-cutting at the expense of both personnel welfare and operational integrity. Each additional claim added weight to the emerging narrative of corporate recklessness, forcing TechCore's leadership to confront the breadth of their mismanagement. Industry monitors and regional business publications began to cover the unfolding scandal extensively. Articles highlighted the unusual public firing at the Grand Marquis Hotel, Mark's subsequent downfall, and the broader implications for corporate governance within the local tech sector. This negative publicity further eroded TechCore's reputation, making it increasingly difficult for the company to retain existing clients or secure new business. The company's share price declined steadily, reflecting investor concerns about litigation exposure and operational disruption. Mark Reynolds faced professional consequences beyond his termination. His license as a certified operations executive was suspended pending a formal disciplinary review by the industry's regulatory board. The suspension not only tarnished his personal standing, but also served as a cautionary tale, about the professional risks of circumventing legal and ethical standards. Colleagues and industry peers distanced themselves, recognizing that Mark's aggressive cost-cutting approach had backfired spectacularly. Amid these developments, TechCore's internal environment grew unstable. The company struggled to maintain operational continuity as client trust eroded and management turnover increased. High-profile clients, including those witnessing my public firing, terminated contracts or renegotiated terms with stricter service-level agreements and penalty clauses. This contractual attrition had a direct financial impact, further pressuring TechCore's liquidity and amplifying bankruptcy concerns. On the personal front, these professional upheavals intersected with significant life changes. My divorce proceedings, which had been ongoing, concluded favorably with equitable asset division that duly accounted for the withheld severance benefits and associated damages. This outcome reflected the comprehensive nature of the legal and financial strategies we employed, ensuring that personal entanglements would not undermine the professional restitution I was pursuing. The judicial process itself culminated in financial judgments exceeding $420,000. This total included the $350,000 in damages we sought for wrongful termination, breach of fiduciary duty, and intellectual property violations, alongside the full $118,000 in severance pay that had been illegally withheld. The judgments also encompassed legal fees and additional compensatory awards intended to rectify the professional and financial harm inflicted. These monetary acknowledgments were the product of painstaking negotiation, legal rigor, and the undeniable weight of evidence we presented. Throughout this escalating crisis, I remained disciplined in my professional conduct. I continued to engage with Derek Collins and his team, transitioning fully into my new role while maintaining oversight of the legal strategy. The comprehensive nature of the judgments and the professional consequences faced by TechCore and Mark Reynolds were milestones within an ongoing process. The company's fate remained uncertain. The financial and reputational damage was severe, but not absolute. My role evolved from one of a wronged employee to a figure demonstrating how meticulous documentation, legal expertise, and strategic patience could dismantle a corporate betrayal from within. The fallout also sent ripples through the local tech industry. Other companies took note of the case as a precedent illustrating the risks inherent in aggressive cost-cutting without due regard for contractual obligations and system dependencies. It became a touchstone for advocating stronger protections for technical employees and reinforcing the importance of transparent corporate governance. This broader impact underscored that the professional reckoning I helped initiate extended well beyond my personal circumstances, contributing to a shift in industry standards and expectations. While these developments marked significant progress, the situation was still dynamic. TechCore's restructuring efforts, bankruptcy proceedings, and potential appeals meant that ongoing vigilance and strategic management of legal and professional relationships remained essential. The lessons learned and the foundations laid during this phase provided a framework for navigating whatever challenges lay ahead, ensuring that professionalism, documentation, and strategic precision would continue to be the cornerstones of my approach. In summary, Mark Reynolds' termination for gross misconduct, the substantial fines imposed on TechCore, the influx of additional employee claims, and the company's reputational collapse all represented critical elements of a cascading professional and legal downfall. These consequences were neither accidental nor isolated, but the direct result of calculated, documented, and systematically pursued actions leveraging contractual rights, compliance failures, and operational realities. This phase of the journey underscored the power of methodical professionalism in transforming adversity into a platform for accountability and renewed opportunity. The court rulings marked a significant milestone in the ongoing professional conflict with TechCore Solutions. After months of strategic legal maneuvering, the final judgment awarded me $350,000 in damages, an amount carefully calculated to encompass the full scope of financial and reputational harm I had endured. This sum included the $118,000 severance pay that the company had unlawfully withheld, reflecting the clear breach of contract supported by explicit terms in my employment agreement. The damages also accounted for compensation related to the breach of fiduciary duty and intellectual property violations, both of which had been rigorously documented and presented during legal proceedings. Beyond the direct monetary awards, the court imposed an additional $50,000 in punitive fines against TechCore Solutions. These fines were levied in response to the company's deliberate attempts to conceal severance liabilities and circumvent statutory labor protections. The punitive nature of this penalty underscored the judiciary's recognition of the company's bad faith conduct, particularly Mark Reynolds' role in orchestrating the wrongful termination and preemptive hiring of a less qualified replacement. The fines were not merely symbolic. They sent a clear warning to corporate executives about the risks of disregarding legal obligations for short-term financial gain. Parallel to the court's judgment, regulatory agencies reinforced the legal findings with their own actions. The State Labor Board, having investigated the complaints filed earlier in the process, imposed $200,000 in penalties on TechCore for multiple labor violations. These included illegal withholding of severance pay, failure to provide adequate notice as mandated by employment laws, and unauthorized modifications to employee contracts post-termination. The agency's detailed report cited evidence from internal emails, payroll discrepancies, and witness testimonies corroborating my claims. This regulatory enforcement added significant pressure on TechCore's leadership to comply with labor laws and rectify systemic governance failures. The combined weight of judicial and regulatory sanctions initiated a profound restructuring within TechCore Solutions. The company was compelled to reform its human resources practices and implement stricter compliance protocols to prevent recurrence of such violations. These reforms involved updating severance policies, enhancing transparency in executive decision-making, and establishing oversight mechanisms to safeguard employee rights. The public nature of these changes, reported in industry journals, further eroded the company's reputation among clients and competitors alike. As part of the broader fallout, Mark Reynolds faced severe professional consequences. Following the court's findings and mounting internal dissatisfaction, he was officially terminated for gross misconduct. This termination was accompanied by a suspension of his professional licenses, pending further disciplinary review by the industry's regulatory board. The suspension reflected the gravity of his actions, violations that transcended internal company policy to breach ethical and legal standards expected of senior executives. Notices circulated within industry associations effectively blacklisted him, limiting future employment prospects and signaling a professional ostracism. TechCore's reputation plummeted amid growing media exposure. Regional business publications extensively covered the scandal, detailing the public firing incident, the subsequent legal battles, and the company's operational failures. Analysts noted the loss of key clients, citing the instability and governance lapses as critical factors undermining business confidence. This negative press contributed to a steady decline in stock valuation and investor trust, exacerbating the company's financial distress and increasing bankruptcy risks. The legal judgments also delivered tangible financial restitution that extended to my personal affairs. My ongoing divorce proceedings, which had coincided with the unfolding corporate dispute, concluded favorably, incorporating the awarded damages and severance payments into the equitable division of assets. This integration ensured that the financial harm inflicted by TechCore's breaches was adequately reflected and compensated, preserving my personal financial stability despite the professional turmoil. The final financial figures from the judgments exceeded $420,000, a comprehensive total that included compensatory damages, the full severance package, legal fees, and punitive awards. This sum was not arbitrary, but reflected precise calculations grounded in documented losses, projected income disruption, and contractual entitlements. The court's detailed rulings explicitly referenced the evidentiary basis for each component, establishing a transparent rationale for the awards and reinforcing the validity of the claims. Throughout the protracted legal process, I maintained a strict adherence to professional conduct and strategic communication. I continued to collaborate closely with Derek Collins, transitioning into my new role while overseeing legal developments. This dual focus ensured that my professional trajectory remained forward-looking, even as the corporate dispute reached its critical legal phase. The comprehensive nature of the judgments and the associated professional consequences for TechCore and Mark Reynolds represented significant, though not final, milestones in an ongoing narrative of accountability and restitution. The case's wider industry implications soon became evident. Other technology firms and professional networks followed the proceedings closely, recognizing the precedent set regarding the enforceability of severance agreements, the protection of intellectual property rights, and the liabilities associated with managerial misconduct. The case was discussed in professional associations and legal seminars, highlighting the importance of meticulous documentation and strategic legal action in defending against corporate malfeasance. This ripple effect contributed to a gradual strengthening of employee protections and corporate governance standards within the sector. Nevertheless, the professional environment remained dynamic. TechCore's ongoing restructuring efforts, bankruptcy considerations, and possible appeals meant that vigilance and strategic management of legal and professional relationships were still essential. The foundations laid through rigorous documentation, expert testimony, and a multi-pronged legal approach provided a robust framework for navigating future developments. My role evolved into that of a reference point for best practices in handling corporate disputes, underscoring the value of combining technical expertise with legal acumen. In summary, the court's award of $350,000 in damages plus $118,000 severance, alongside $50,000 in punitive fines and $200,000 in regulatory penalties, constituted a comprehensive professional vindication. Mark Reynolds' termination and the widespread reputational damage to TechCore epitomized the cascading consequences of calculated yet reckless corporate decisions. These outcomes demonstrated the efficacy of strategic, well-documented legal action in confronting and dismantling corporate betrayal, reinforcing that professional integrity and contractual rights, when assertively protected, can prevail against even the most entrenched corporate misconduct. Today, I lead the system architecture team at Collins Innovations, a dynamic startup spearheaded by Derek Collins himself. My role here is both challenging and rewarding, markedly different from my experience at TechCore. The salary is a 25% increase over my previous compensation, a tangible recognition of my expertise and the value I bring. More importantly, I hold a significant equity stake in the company, aligning my long-term interests with the startup's success. This ownership position adds a strategic dimension to my work, transforming my contributions into shared enterprise growth rather than just a salaried role. The professional environment at Collins Innovations fosters innovation and respect for specialized knowledge, a stark contrast to the prioritization of cost-cutting I endured before. Here, my architectural designs are foundational to the startup's competitive edge and scalability plans. Derek and I share a vision centered on sustainable growth driven by robust, well-documented infrastructure. This alignment of goals allows me to exercise creative and strategic authority over system direction, something I had been systematically deprived of at TechCore. Reflecting on the journey that brought me here, I recognize that meticulous documentation was my strongest asset throughout the ordeal. Every schematic, email, and contract clause meticulously archived became a pillar supporting my claims and a framework for building an unassailable case. This level of detailed record-keeping is often undervalued in tech environments, but proved indispensable in navigating corporate betrayal. It transformed what could have been a humiliating setback into a platform for professional resurgence. Equally crucial was a deep understanding of contractual literacy. Knowing the precise terms of my severance, intellectual property rights, and non-competition obligations allowed me to defend my position rigorously. This knowledge guided every strategic decision, from initiating legal action to negotiating new employment terms. It reinforced that in professional disputes, awareness of contractual frameworks is as vital as technical expertise. Strategic patience was the third cornerstone of my response. The initial public firing was designed to provoke an immediate emotional reaction, but I consciously avoided that trap. Instead, I focused on gathering evidence, consulting legal counsel, and cultivating alliances. particularly with Derek. This measured approach ensured that actions taken were deliberate and professional rather than reactionary, maintaining credibility and maximizing leverage. The public humiliation I endured was a catalyst, not a setback. It exposed the underlying corporate malpractices and galvanized me to act with greater resolve. Importantly, I maintained composure and professionalism throughout, ensuring that my reputation remained intact and even strengthened through my measured response. This poise was essential in gaining the respect of new allies and the industry at large. Justice in this context was not about emotional vindication, but about systems, legal, contractual, and organizational, that uphold fairness and accountability. By engaging these systems thoughtfully and thoroughly, I was able to convert personal adversity into institutional accountability, setting a precedent that professionalism and documented truth can prevail over arbitrary corporate actions. My competence was ultimately validated, not through confrontation, but through calm, strategic action underpinned by thorough preparation. This experience reinforced that professional excellence extends beyond technical skills to include disciplined documentation, legal literacy, and strategic foresight. Now, as I oversee the architecture of complex, scalable systems at Collins Innovations, I appreciate the superior work-life balance I've achieved. Freed from the toxic environment at TechCore, I'm empowered to innovate, mentor, and lead without fear of unwarranted reprisals or undermining. This balance has revitalized my passion for technology and deepened my commitment to fostering environments where expertise is valued and protected. In sum, the trajectory from public disgrace to professional leadership underscores a vital lesson. Meticulous preparation and unwavering professionalism can transform betrayal into opportunity. The architecture of my career has been rebuilt stronger and more resilient, mirroring the systems I design: robust, scalable, and strategically sound. As I continue to build at Collins Innovations, I carry forward this ethos, a testament to the power of calm professionalism and thorough preparation in overcoming adversity and achieving superior outcomes.